Steve Munisteri is an attorney and is currently senior advisor to Governor Greg Abbott. Mr. Munisteri served as the chairman of the Republican Party of Texas from 2010 to 2015. After stepping down as Texas Republican Party chairman, Mr. Munisteri joined U.S. Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky as a senior advisor to Paul's 2016 presidential campaign. In 2017, Mr. Munisteri was appointed to the White House staff as Deputy Assistant to the President and Principal Deputy Director to the Office of Public Liaison. Mr. Munisteri also served as a senior advisor to Texas Senator John Cornyn's re-election campaign in 2019. So, without further ado, and he's also obviously a big proponent of school choice, and we were so lucky to have him here with us today, and he's going to tell us how we're going to get the ball across the field on this one. So, thank you, Mr. Munisteri. Without further ado, Steve,
Good evening. Good evening. You know, a few minutes ago, I witnessed something, and you probably did too, that I think a lot of people take for granted. I was watching as you sung God Bless America, which, by the way, I can't sing, but that's why I was keeping it a low volume. But I stood up because I thought that was a beautiful rendition. But what I noticed is a lot of the members in the audience, if you know, started to react and stand up. And what you could feel, did you feel the pride for our country when she did that? And isn't that why you're here?
Yeah, absolutely.
You're here because you want to hear about policy as to how to make our state and our country stronger. And if I was to pick just one thing government could do that has an effect on everyday life, I would say it's adopting government policy that ensures every Texan and every American has a well-paying job. Right? Because if you think about it, it's that paycheck that pays for the mortgage, pays for the rent, allows people to have transportation, allows people to save for their children to go to college. Most importantly, it allows for the American dream, and I'm from an immigrant family. My father was born in Italy. My mother's parents were born in Italy. And that American dream is this, which I've been able to realize, and some of you may be able to identify with it. You leave the next generation better off than the generation you had before. And the way you do that is through freedom and personal responsibility. And a job is what enables you to do that, to be able to accumulate wealth, pass it on, start a business. So what would be the two factors that we can make sure that that good paying job is available? It's twofold. It's having an economic environment that creates the job, and it's about an educational system that people then can be qualified for those jobs, which we'll talk about in a moment. Now, as to the first, I'm very happy to tell you that Texas is going gangbusters on the economic side. I've worked for the governor for a little less than 4 years. Every month that I have checked and looked back 12 months, Texas has been the #1 job creator in the United States. Today, as I am standing here, we're the #1 job creator over the last 12 months. Yes, give Texas a hand. With Governor Abbott, we've attracted more Fortune 500 companies than any state, 55 out of the 100. Over 290 companies have relocated here since he was in office. Our economic growth in 2022, 2023, 2024 is outstanding. Let me give you some examples. You may not remember this. How many of y'all remember that 2 years ago, in the second quarter of 2022, the U.S. economy contracted? A lot of people forget that. It contracted all over the United States in 40 out of 50 states. But guess where it didn't contract? You got it. You're getting the hang of this. The answer is going to be Texas, just about everything, right?
Texas and probably South Dakota.
You know, South Dakota's up there. Sometimes Alaska's up there. But I don't count those because they're so small next to us, right? Yeah, so in 2022, spring of 2022, of those 10 states that had positive economic growth, and you're going to get the hang of this, guess what was number one? Texas. Fourth quarter of that year, guess which had the highest growth rate? 7% plus. The third quarter, guess who had the highest growth rate? That's a trick question. Karen's heard this before. It's asking Alaska, but it don't really count. They only have 700,000 people. But our growth rate in that quarter was 8.2%. To put that in perspective, during the entire 12 years that President Obama and President Trump were in office, growth rate in the United States never went over 2.9%. That was the high point. We were at 8.2%. That's 2022. 2023, Federal Reserve says last 6 months, guess which state was number one for the last 6 months of 2023? You got it. And again, we're running, blowing and going. We have the number one population growth in the United States. We've averaged over 400,000 new people every year since 2000. We had 470,000 net new last year. That's like a whole nother city moving in. And the reason why that's important to economic growth is there's been 3 major studies on population and economic growth. One's by a guy by the name of Angus Magnuson. And if you can believe this, he studied economic growth from AD 8. I don't even know how you find the number for that. To about 2008. Another guy, Peter Yu from the Federal Reserve. Another guy by the name of Thomas Piketty, who's actually a French socialist, and he studied for 310 years of economic growth. They all came to the same conclusion. Societies that are expanding their population, a good portion of the economic growth is due to population growth, anywhere from about 40 to 50%. So when you have a state, as we do, that has grown by about 10 million people since 2000, which is way more than most states, we're going to get another 10 million by 2050. So we know we're going to have the strong economic growth that will create jobs. But then it comes down to, will you, as a society, will we, if we want to make this state better, be providing the type of education that will allow people to have those jobs? Because education is a key factor in what people make to pay those bills I talked about. Let me give you some example of what the difference is in education levels and why it's so important you get that K through 12 start and that people graduate from high school and they graduate. I was just talking to the gentleman who's a teacher. Where did you go? Yeah, we were just talking about folks who really, he's teaching at community college, and there are folks from high school that actually don't have the skills in math to be able to progress. And it's important that you progress and get that bachelor's degree and get that professional degree, despite what you might hear some people say, college is not worth it. Let me give you some numbers. The latest numbers I saw on unemployment for people who don't have a high school degree, and we've had relatively low unemployment. For people that don't have a high school degree, 5.6%. People with a professional degree, 1.2%. Almost 100% if you have a professional degree. In terms of earnings, professional degree versus high school education is about 3 to 1. The average person with a professional degree in the United States gets a little over $2,200 a week. Person with a high school education, a little under $800 a week. If you put that in terms of salary, the median for somebody with a professional degree in the United States, median income, meaning half more, half less, is a shade under $115,000 a year. If you have a professional degree. If you have a bachelor's degree, it's a little over $77,000. If you have a high school degree, it's $37,000. Here's another one that people don't focus on. If you're not going to go to college, you've got to at least get out of high school. In the state of Texas, those that do not have a high school degree make a little less than $6,300 and change less than somebody with a high school degree. It's worth $500 a month. So education is not only the key to getting the good job, but it's also one of the keys as to why we can and need to continue to attract businesses. They want a workforce that's educated. One of my jobs, they mentioned I was at the White House, so I had a senior federal position as the principal deputy director on President Trump's staff for 2 years in the Office of Public Liaison. That means we dealt with associations, businesses, companies, CEOs that wanted to talk about policy. Number one complaint, they couldn't find enough qualified people to do the jobs. In talking to like the CEO of Lockheed, they were talking about they were having to do apprentice programs to teach people because the jobs of today are not like the assembly line 20, 30, or 50 years ago. A lot of these are very highly skilled. You have to be highly trained, even if you don't have a college degree, but they're high paying. Under President Trump, and I'm not doing a campaign speech because I got to keep it non-partisan too, but just as a fact. One of the things that occurred that I was there was never before in the history of the United States, since they kept the records on employment, had there been a time when there were more job openings than people looking for a job. And to compound that problem was when you talk to these CEOs, they couldn't find skilled labor. I don't mean like manual labor. They couldn't find a skilled workforce in terms of having the skills, the math skills, the basic English skills. So that's why education is the linchpin. I mentioned to y'all that my father was born in Italy, my grandfather on my mother's side. But the thing that they taught, and to me as an example, is my grandfather on my mother's side didn't have a college education, was a projectionist in the movie theater, then later he sold life insurance. By the way, anybody sells life insurance, my grandfather said, never ever go in the life insurance sales business because you always have to be nice to every neighbor and everybody around you because they could be a customer. My mom said the same thing. She wasn't allowed to get mad at the next door neighbor's kids because her dad was trying to sell them a policy. But by doing that, even though he didn't have a college education, he only had 3 daughters. He didn't have any sons. Remember in the 1940s, first of all, most people overwhelmingly didn't go to college, but it was even rarer for women to go to college, let alone women who were the daughters of immigrants who didn't have formal education. My grandfather put all 3 of his daughters through college in the 40s and the 50s. It's the reason why I could be at the White House one generation later. So education has to be at the forefront. So what's Governor Abbott doing? What's our legislature doing? And this is also an argument against those that say school choice or parental choice is somehow the enemy of public school education. The state of Texas already had set aside in its budget $500 million for a school choice program that unfortunately didn't pass. But even with that money set aside, Texas spent over $80 billion on education, number 3 in the country. And we continue to spend more. Over the last 10 years, we have spent $30 billion. That's $3 billion increase every year. So there is plenty of money for public education. It is a fallacy to say that we can't have both. And the governor decided, and I think rightly so, that as we look at education, and by the way, I've also got a tell on him. He said, you know, he's a teacher now, but he's a reformed lawyer too, just like I am. Recovering. I'm one as well. I'm well too. Yes. But he was telling me just a moment ago, I'm not making this up, you tell him that this is true. He was just telling me a moment ago when I was listening the problems he was having with what's occurring in some of the school districts here in Bexar County. And so then the question becomes, if we're not obtaining the optimum education system, rather than keep on doing the same thing over and over again, what can we do to try to make it better? And you know, competition forever has been something that makes things better. And I'm old enough to remember when you could not compete with the post office. There was no UPS. There was no FedEx. Right? You remember? Oh no, it's going to put them out of business. Well, you know, we still have the United States Postal Service. They still have parcels, but guess what? You have the freedom to choose which one you want to go to on delivering the packet, and I would bet it's really making all of them work harder to make sure that they get your business. Why shouldn't that apply to education? And why isn't that something we don't look at when we're trying to make things better, to say, maybe there's some alternatives that can make it better? And you were mentioning charters, right? So he was talking about, it wasn't quite school choice, but it was a start. I was the state chairman after we had already started the charters, but they hadn't been expanded. And I went down there to testify and heard all the same arguments against school. It's going to drain the school districts. There's not going to be many schools. It's going to take resources. Now, you just heard how much we've increased resources. But you know what else has increased? The charter student enrollment. I'm doing this from memory, but I believe when I was state chairman, it had been around 50,000. Today it's about 300,000. Oh, it's 400. All right. Now, has that drained the public school system? No, there's still 5.5 million. But parents have a choice. So even if there wasn't any tangible benefit, which I'm going to show you there is, but even if there wasn't, even if a charter school or a school choice private school you went to, even if it wasn't better, it was just the same as a public school, isn't there a benefit to you as a parent and a family having the freedom to choose where your children go as opposed to where the government can tell you where your children go? And you know, when we were singing to the flag, wasn't really the whole thing behind the flag, the whole philosophy is we are a free country, a free state, a free people. We should have the freedom and education as well. Right? Yeah. Absolutely. Yes. So, when looking at that, we say, in addition to freedom, are there any other reasons to have school choice? And the answer is, of course. If you know, the other side, a lot of times, I mean, I don't mean politically, I mean partisanly, I mean in terms of philosophy. The left and left-wing educators, haven't you always heard, oh, just look at the science, look at the data? Okay, let's play that game. There are 100, according to Mountain State Institute, and you can go on their website, they have found 187 separate studies on school or parental choice. 187. And they list them, so it's not BS. You can just go click on them and see. 187 studies. They did an analysis of what the conclusions of those studies were. 84% of the studies say there was a positive effect on schools. 10% said it was neutral. So that should take away the left's argument, because if it's not doing any harm, if it's doing just as good, why shouldn't a parent choose? And 6% said it was negative. But you know, when you have 94% saying it doesn't do all those terrible things, if you're really going by the science, shouldn't you go with the 94% and not the 6%? Here's something else I found interesting when I was looking at those studies. On a wide range of criteria where you would judge whether a school is good: test scores, educational attainment. Here's one category I love: parental satisfaction with the school, diversity, public safety. There were studies on all those. Bottom line, folks, a majority of on every one of those topics, every single category I just mentioned, the majority of those studies that were on those categories said school choice made things better. Two categories I want to mention specifically. One is test scores, because everybody gets concerned about test scores. 29 studies have been done. 29 on does school choice help or hurt test scores. 26 said it makes test scores go up.
Take them off.
One said same, and 2 said no, it's the other way. But if you have 27 out of 29 saying it doesn't make it go the other way, again, if you're going by the science, you're going by the data, you're doing it in aggregate, it all comes to the same conclusion. Competition, just like with charters, school choice, looking at the data, it works. And this is not some sort of academic fantasy or school project. We have states that have done it. This isn't like, hey, we're going to be the first ones to try it, so people are scared about how it's going to turn out, right? According to the Cato Institute, 33 states have at least one program of school choice already. There are 11 states that are universal. You can look at some of the states they predicted bad things would happen, like in Florida. But Florida, the Catholic schools now have a waiting list of people trying to get in because it has improved things so much and they have had help. Arizona, it said, oh, it's gonna bust their budget. No, the most recent data shows that it actually was a net positive on the budget. In fact, there have been 74 studies on whether school choice helps or hurts a state government state budget. 68 out of 74 of those studies have concluded that if you adopt school choice, you actually do better fiscally. It doesn't, you may have heard the other side on this school choice say, oh, the more people we put into school choice, it's going to bust the budget 10,000. It's just not what the data says. Arizona, as I say, and Iowa most recently have done well. So then you ask, okay, we didn't get it here. What's the future hold? And what are we talking about in terms of what the governor wants and what we're looking for? Because is everybody convinced we need school choice, or do I have to say? Thank you. So I can can my next 45 minutes of my speech to try to convince you. Actually, I was done on that. If I hadn't convinced you by now, it was pretty hopeless. So now we know we all want school choice. The governor wants school choice. Yes, he does. So I gotta be careful about not getting political, so I'll just say it like this. I think there were some people who didn't believe how serious he was, who may not be coming back next time, right?
17 of them.
So I'm going to stop at that line right there. You and I are in the same boat, because I'm on state time talking about policy. AFP, we cannot talk about partisan politics. We're just talking about policy, and how we're going to get it through. So what was on the table, and I just have to preface this by saying, none of us will know what the final bill is or what the final tinkering will be, because the bill that was advancing didn't get passed. So you got to start over. That's a little bit exaggeration. You can use what we've done in the past, but there has to be new bills filed. So we can kind of look at what last time was talked about, and the governor indicated he was positive about, which was a program, and they had authorized, it just hadn't been appropriated because they didn't pass the bill, $500 million that would allow $10,000 per student to be put in an educational savings account. Now, that allows for 50,000 students. So let me talk about a couple of issues that come up with that. The other side I know this is going to shock people. The other side doesn't always tell the truth, and they try to do scare tactics. No! It even gets worse than that. Sometimes the media's on their side. No! And guess what? They don't always tell you the truth. I know. And there's no Santa Claus either. Yeah, I know, they want to be. But let me tell you how dishonest they are. They'll say, first of all, they call it a voucher. Yes. What the government set up is not a voucher. A voucher is, I give you like a check or a ticket or something you can go spend. So then they scare people like you're going to go out and buy a Cadillac or go on a vacation. Right. You don't control the money. The proposal was to set it up through the state controller. There's an account for you that then pays the school that you're going to. And you have a watchdog there, and it was proposed to have independent audit. So this idea that the money would go anywhere other than education is just garbage. Now, some people will say, and there's a lot of confusion about this, are you for universal, meaning everybody is eligible or not? And some people say, well, this is 500 million, 10,000, that's 50,000 people. Well, that can't be universal. It is universal eligibility. It's just not universal availability. So let me explain. I'm assuming the Alamo Dome holds about 50,000. Is that right? Roughly. We'll just say it does. 60. Who's counting? So let's just say the Alamo Dome holds 50,000. Who's a favorite conservative entertainer who could sell out the Alamo Dome? George Strait.
Kid Rock.
Kid Rock. All right. I'm a rock and roll guy. I like that all summer long. All right. By the way, I just came back from Milwaukee. I got to hear him live and also during his, I also got to hear him during the rehearsal. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Jeff Dunham.
Now we're going to go with Kid Rock.
Yeah, the Rock, man. Kid Rock.
So Kid Rock wants to come to San Antonio and be in the Alamo Dome. And we are convinced there's way more than the Alamo Dome can hold, right?
Right.
Universal eligibility means anybody can buy a ticket to the Alamo Dome to see Kid Rock. It doesn't mean that everybody can fit in. There are not enough seats available for everybody, but everybody is eligible. But what you would expect would Kid Rock would probably pull some tickets aside to say, my family and friends, probably invite some of his friends like, I don't know, Donald Trump, yeah. Not politically, just I'm talking about just friends. Personal friends. And he invites them. Well, they're going to the front of the line. He probably then would have some corporate sponsors. They'll probably have the suites or whatever. So then they take some tickets. And maybe, like I have an American Express card. Sometimes they say, hey, here we're having a deal. You can sign up early for the tickets on Ticketmaster. He probably has some of those. If they use up all the tickets, there aren't any available for the general public. But usually all the tickets aren't used up. And there's some left over that the general public. That's universal eligibility without universal availability. So now think about that Alamo Dome as being the 50,000 seats that are available for school choice. You're going to prioritize some of those. So tier 1 are disabled students who are economically disadvantaged. So if their family doesn't make 4 times more than the poverty line, so it's not poverty, it's basically disabled kids whose parents can't afford the special needs. They go to the front of the line because these are special needs kids that are not getting what they need. I think most people could agree we should put them up in the front of the line. And then there's a couple of other tiers based on if you're 185% of poverty, then 400%, then everybody else. So if all the seats aren't used up, then anybody can go, but you could use them all up. But even if you use them all up, you can expand the program later by just adding more money to it. The key is getting the structure in it. And one of the things that drives me crazy are the folks on the other side that wrongly say it won't work even though we have other states to prove it. But I try to disarm them by saying, okay, let's just take it your position and say it was true that I don't agree. That you think school choice wouldn't work. Why don't you put it to the test for a couple of years? If we have the structure for it, the legislature can always cut the appropriations down. The more they cut it down, the less that are going in. On the other hand, if it works the way I think it will work, and the governor thinks it can work, hopefully it's so popular that then you add money to the program. And then you have more and more of those seats that are not the VIP seats. So we have to make sure we don't let the perfect be the enemy of not only a good, but a good start. The key is we have never had true school choice in the state of Texas. We had to start with charter, but we haven't had it. So folks, what we want to do is get it going. Because that's what the left has always done with their education programs. They just keep moving the goalposts. They do the slippery slope. They start a program and they creep in their ideological direction they want to go, right? Why don't we just play their game, which is let's start the program, show it's great, show it improves education, give parents choice, and then we can expand the program later. But you don't have to change the structure. All you got to do then is change the appropriations. And our state has been very fortunate in that we had, I'm going to brag on my boss again, under Governor Abbott, last biennium, we had a $32.7 billion surplus. We did. And the state controller has indicated we have roughly a $20 billion, is his last estimate, for this surplus. Those can go up and down as you get closer. But we also have, I think his estimate was we're going to have $24 billion in the rainy day fund. That's in addition to the surplus. So it's not like we don't have money to do this program. Now, where are we in terms of getting it done? There have been some employment changes coming up in the legislature.
Amen.
Amen.
Here's hoping.
Now, they're changing. We just have to make sure they
Yeah, it gets in
it
November.
gets there. So we need 76 votes. School choice had never gotten up to 60 before, and on a test vote to start with, it had 60, and then we hit a ceiling at 63. But we need 76. But it had got past the Senate, so we've never been this close before. You can correct me if I'm wrong. We've never been this close where you have the governor pushing it, the Senate passed it, and we had 63 that we know we're signing on for. Our current count is, depending on what happens at the fall election, we think we're already in that 78 to 80 range where there should be enough votes for ESAs. And I have a prediction, which is if folks know it's going to pass, there may be some folks that were no's that turn to yeses. Because I know this is like telling you also the Easter Bunny is not real. No! I know. Not all legislators have spines based on ideology, right? Some kind of go with the wind. We need to make sure that wind is a hurricane behind us.
That's right.
That will give them the courage to go all the way there. Yes? And here's the good news that should give them some spine, those that don't have it on this. And you were mentioning this on the poll results. University of Houston Polling Center and Texas Southern University, their polls that he was talking to about came out this week. And I will point something out about these polls. 2 years ago, I was privy to the governor's polling on this issue when he was getting behind it, on what his private polling was saying. I can't share that with you, but I'll just say this. It wasn't at odds with the public polling, which was basically Republicans supported it by a substantial majority, independent voters supported it, not quite as much, and Democrats, which seemed like a great thing at the time, depending on what poll you looked at, from a quarter to a third of Democrats supported school choice. I thought that was great. I thought that was great until I read the poll that he referenced. You can go to the Texas Tribune and see it, where now it's up to 55% of Democrats support it. Yes, give the Democrats a hand. We're bipartisan, right? We're nonpartisan, bipartisan. We're just for school choice here. 55-45 Democrats, 65-35 independents, 73-27 among Republicans. Overall, that translates into 65% for school choice, 35% in the state again. That's 2-1. In a country that's evenly divided, in a country where people are all siloed, there are very many issues that you can get 2 out of every 3 people to agree on. School choice is the one. And here's something that the Democrat, I won't say Democrats because we're not partisan, the educrats won't tell you. Because they'll say public schools, we got to support because we have a high percentage of people in public schools that come from families that are economically disadvantaged, some traditional minority communities that are disadvantaged. If you break it down by demographics in that poll, Today, 70% of African American families support school choice, and that number goes to 72% if you say you're prioritizing by need, which we are with special needs and those things. So that 72% is basically the plan we have. So almost 3 out of 4 families in the African American community say they support school choice. 63% of Hispanic families, and in many of our districts, Hispanic families are the majority of the district. That's almost 2/3. And then the lowest group that supports school choice are Caucasians at 62%. Here's another myth. So it's a total myth that people in economically disadvantaged areas or in diverse communities do not want this. It's completely the opposite. So I asked the folks on the left, who are you representing if you're not representing the poor and the disadvantaged and the special needs? Who are you holding back, and why are you holding them back? Maybe because it's in their best interest to keep the status quo, but not in the children's best interest to keep the status quo, right? One final note on that polling and where we are. There was a lot of talk that the reason why school choice could never get through is because rural Texans don't want private schools. This poll, most recent one, there's just as much support in the rural communities as there are in the urban communities. There are. And some earlier ones suggest rules are even higher. Because what these pollsters and these politicians didn't understand is if you are a patriotic Texan, you're not just concerned about how the people are doing in your community.
Right.
You're concerned about how the whole state is doing, and that's what school choice means. So with your help and your leadership, we have a chance to change the trajectory on this issue of education, provide jobs for people that are good, and maintain Texas as the #1 state. But it will be your woman power and manpower working on this issue that will get the legislature to get the bill in front of the governor. And this is what I promise. The governor will sign the school choice bill.
All right, so we'll bring it over here. Just go ahead and state your name and what your question is.
Hi, my name is Susan Parker. I want to know, why don't you ask for the whole enchilada, universal ESAs?
Well, it is universal in the sense that everybody is eligible. It's just a question of funding. Theoretically, if you put all the money in there, it would cover everybody. So,
Don't you think that the different funds that you mentioned would go toward helping to educate more than just?
absolutely. So we'll make sure we're on the same wavelength. I'm not saying don't go for the whole enchilada. I'm saying that if the legislature is only willing to give you half the enchilada, but here's the deal, that they have a plate that you can add more enchiladas on the next session because you already have the structure, wouldn't you want to do that? So there's no magic number. The 500 million was just what the legislature came up with last time. So it's just going to be whatever you can push it up to. But something you need to keep in mind and is this. The structure will be there because it's university eligibility. You can always have more students by the legislature in subsequent sessions just continually to upping the amount of the appropriation.
What I've seen though is that you start here and they start bringing it down.
Yeah, but that's not the experience with charters. It went the other way. When charters worked, we got more charters. And if this works, look, you heard the poll numbers. And by the way, you can see I don't mind pushing back. I'm a frank talker. With those numbers where 2 out of 3 Texans want school choice, don't you think if a program, even if it's not as big as you want to start with, that if it's successful, when you come back to the next session to the legislature and the next, it will go up, not down? I think parents are the most effective for it. The reason why we've got, and remember the history on this, and your husband knows more about it than I do, but I want to say it's been at least 20 years since it passed the chamber. Is my memory on that right? the school choice bill? The last time it passed, I know it passed one of the chambers way back. But the Senate, right? We've never been in a spot where you could even get one student on school choice. So to be able to get $500 million at least to start with is progress. And remember what I was talking about the left and how they get their ideology into education and other things? They go for as much enchilada as they can get. But if they don't get all of it the first time, they keep going and they keep going. It's not that we're trying to get a smaller enchilada. It's we're trying to get as much enchilada as we can now in order to get a lot of enchilada later. And isn't it appropriate I'm saying that at this restaurant?
Oh, yeah, I was just thinking about that.
Yes, sir, you had your hand up.
Your question.
I'm Rick Briscoe, and this is about the search for 76. Several members of the House have confirmed to me that the bill that was considered in the last regular session gave roughly $4,000 back to the school that the students departed. So even if the student,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last one. 4,000 to what?
the school the student was leaving,
Sort of as a payoff to
Oh,
the
yeah.
school.
and that was literally, they confirmed the search for 76. The problem with that, of course, is let's say a parent's child goes from Edgewood here in town to John Marshall. Well, that means John Marshall is short $4,000. And that's not a winning formula. And, you know, you talk about appropriations, but if the money follows the student, there's zero change. If you're spending $16,000 on a student at Edgewood, you'd be spending $16,000 on a student at John Marshall.
Yeah, so couple points on that. The bill that got passed in order to get passed out of committee, but they didn't get the 76 even on the floor with the enticements, did have things to entice legislators to vote for the program so it could go over the line. So there was extra money put to public education to dispel the myth that public education. They, because it did not get passed,
They won't get it.
that now means I don't want to get ahead of the skis and say something before we know what the final form is, but let me just say this way. The fact that there were enticements to get to 76 when we didn't have 76 does not necessarily mean those enticements will be there next time if we're over 76 and we don't have to give any enticements. That's the best way I can answer it.
Well, the problem is a lot of these parents can't afford to $4,000 or $6,000 to go to John Marshall.
I'm having a hard time following you on that.
Well, if they get an education savings account for $10,000 and the school wants 16, you're still short.
No, you're right on that, but there are schools that there are private schools with tuitions under 10,000.
That's right.
Yes.
All right, next question's coming over here. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, just raise your hand, but next question's coming over here.
And by the way, let me just correct something, because it's just been updated. The state is now spending about $15,000 per student.
Well, whatever.
Yeah, no, but that also tells you that there's more money there the 10,000 was for last session. I just use that as an example of what they may be at the starting point. That just because it was 10,000 last time doesn't mean it's 10,000 next time. It could be a little higher, a little lower. My guess is it won't be lower than 10,000, and if there's more money, it could be higher. But there's two factors on the overall cost of the program: the amount per student and the number of students that you try to fund. So the higher you go per student, so for example, if you went up to 16,000, you may cover more schools, but then you reduce the number of students that can go to those schools because the overall pot would be the same. So that's why it's a balance where they've looked at there are schools that are under 10,000. And I don't say this to promote any particular religion. I know for a fact, just because the Catholic schools are up there a lot, that they were making a point that a high percentage of the Catholic schools in the state of Texas are less than 10,000.
Right. Yeah. True.
My name is Chris Becker. I studied under John Merrifield at UTSA, wrote a few books on school choice, so it's been a pet topic of mine for almost 20 years. And this week I actually started at one of those charter schools teaching economics to 8th graders, in addition to teaching economics to college freshmen at Northwest Vista. I'm sure you're aware that around here, property taxes, about half of property taxes go to public schools. And something you mentioned with the competition earlier, another thing that happens with the competition is the more competition there is, the more the price is gonna come down. Quality's gonna tend to go up, the price is gonna tend to come down. And so I'm curious if there's anything tied into all this that will eventually bring that level of property taxes around here down as well, when the costs for these schools eventually inevitably come down as well.
So there are two factors that can affect it. One is if you have an overall savings in education, and we've seen in some of the states that there has been a net positive, so your point is well taken on that. But I think the governor wants immediate property tax relief, which is the reason why they had the homestead exemption go up last time, and we used a portion of the state surplus to go towards property tax, pushing it down. I don't think I'm getting ahead of my skis on this because he hasn't announced his priorities, but I know that I'm authorized to say that further buy downs on property taxes with a portion of the new surplus will be part of what he advocates. So those can happen independently, but they can also complement each other, that if you're using surplus funds to pay down property taxes separately, and then you're using a portion of surplus funds to fund school choice, and then you get benefit from that, that those can complement each other. So the answer is yes, but it's maybe a little bit different than the way you're envisioning, in that there may be a separate attempt to buy down the ML.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and come over here. I think there is also some hands here. Once we do the back, I'm gonna start working my way over here, okay? So everyone's gonna get a chance to, as long as we don't run out of time, everyone's gonna get a chance to answer the question, or get their question answered.
Hi, my name is Michelle Gonzalez. My question is, how are we gonna avoid government, or have limited government regulations and with student attachment coming into your household? Because now, if you're homeschooled, and that's my biggest concern. is
Yeah, so
I don't want them trying to tell me how to.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I forgot to mention, it would only be an opt-in. So at the worst anybody could do is that whatever regulations, if any, the legislature comes up with, if you're not comfortable, you're not forced to go into the system. You can just do it the way you're doing it now. So the worst it would be is the same you are now, and the best it would be is that you would have an option that you could live with, but the choice would still be yours. And a lot of this, again, it's the problem I have in answering specific questions is we don't know what the specific form of the bill will be, because we don't even know who's going to be in the legislature, because there are about a half dozen competitive state rep seats. And we don't know for sure if it's going to be the same bill as last time. This is just a guess on my end, no one's told me this, but the odds that you'll have exactly the same thing word for word as the final bill as was last time, I would think there'd be some changes just because you're going to have new chefs in the kitchen. But I do think it gives you an idea about the kind of structure that will probably be the starting point that people will be talking about. But definitely will not be mandatory. I mean, if whatever you're doing now in homeschooling, you still have the right to do. But I know people are concerned about what requirements would come with it.
Would it be a big concern? There's a lot of people homeschooled now. That should be something that should be talked about.
Well, one thing that's 100% is you wouldn't be forced in the program. You could do what you're doing now. So it couldn't be any worse than it is now.
All right, who else had their hand raised? Okay, just state your name and your question.
Okay, so hi, my name is Laurie Beard. So 2 parts is, I go with the first woman, she said, I don't think that what
So whatever that final amount is, and whether it is or is not enough to cover everybody's costs, and how many students, whether you'd have enough for 50,000 students or 100,000 or 200,000. The governor is limited by what comes to his desk, other than threatening a veto. So at the end of the day, he's already outlined what he wants. He wants universal eligibility, remembering that's not universal availability. But the reason why you want to start with universal eligibility is because if it's part of the structure when you start and it's carried forward, that means if you can convince the legislature in subsequent sessions to add to it, then everybody, if the money is there and it's not all used up, then everybody can use it. So the governor has kind of said this is the broad outline of what he wants. The specifics, though, are going to be controlled by the individual legislators. So those concerns, or if you want to hire them out, y'all need to tell your legislators that. The one leverage he has, aside from well, I'll stay on the politic part of it. I'll just notice that there was a change in employment by some people. Other than by the fear that he may become involved later with their employment, is the other leverage he has is that if it's just woefully inadequate and not even just a smidgen, he can say, I'll veto that. He did that. There was a bill idea that was floated for a far smaller number, and the governor said on that, I'm going to veto it. That's what caused him then to move it through the committee. And we were hopeful, because it got through the committee, but the votes just weren't there on the floor. So I would just, it just comes to her point, which is a valid one, and yours is too, which is, if you can get a whole enchilada, you go for it. If you don't, you go for the 3/4. If you can't get 3/4, you get half. If you can't get half, you get a quarter if a quarter's better. If it's just, if it's just a morsel, I mean, it's just not even a bite, on that you might just say, y'all aren't even serious about letting us start on this, I'll veto the morsel. I can't tell you where those red lines are because no one has filed the bill that I'm aware of. Well, it's not even bill filing time. So we just have to wait to see. So your concern is what? And let me just preface this by saying this so you know where I'm coming from. In 1977, I was state chairman of a group called Texas Young Americans for Freedom, which is a conservative youth group. We made it one of our projects back then, which is now 47 years ago, to go up and lobby for school vouchers, which was not the ESA program, we just wanted vouchers. I was one of the volunteer lobbyists 47 years ago for Texas. So you're not gonna hear an argument from me that we should try to have the choice between a bigger program or a smaller program, against having a bigger program. I'm just kind of telling you kind of realistically what are our strategy options and what are some alternatives that may happen. And everybody has to put their line someplace as to, is it enough to get me to support it or not? Everybody's gonna have their own line. I'm hoping that the support level is high enough where the vast majority of school choice advocates would say that's a good start. But put the pressure on your legislators. Nicely.
All right, next question is coming over here to Javier.
Javier Signs, and this pertains more to like her question about regulations, and more pertaining to, I guess, Catholic schools, because that's where I sent all of my children. And I had never thought of this until I heard it on the radio. If, I guess the more people that get involved in this program, would the government get more involved in the school, their teachings, the way they do things, and so forth?
So that's, at the end of the day, that will be determined by the language of the bill. I feel 100% confident in telling you that the governor would threaten to veto any bill that would impinge on religious freedom. Remembering he was the Attorney General when we went and filed the lawsuit or defended the lawsuit on the 10 Commandments. The other thing that I think will give you reassurance is this: the Association of Catholic Bishops, which is represented by Jennifer Allman, they were frequently in our office, other offices, and looking at it. the Catholic Church and the Catholic schools came out in strong favor of the bill. So I think you can take comfort in knowing that if they thought that the state of Texas was going to affect their religious teachings, they wouldn't do that. But I want to give you one other caveat. There is no bill right now. So I'm again a little disadvantaged that we're talking about kind of a concept based on what was proposed last time. But that's the one thing I feel I feel confident about a lot of things about it. But one of the things I feel very confident about is they are not going to interfere with Christian teachings on Christian schools.
And when you say opt out, sorry, because it's still tied to that, sorry. Would there be something that would give your property tax money back if you did opt out because you're not really thinking
So,
that's
again, it
totally
would come
separate.
down to what
You
the
still have to pay
legislators put in
taxes.
that. That was not in the last one. So whether somebody could get that or not, I don't know. And one thing I learned, and he was telling me he's a recovering lawyer as well. One thing I learned practicing law for 27 years is if you don't know what you're talking about, don't fake it. And so I just don't know if there's a chance for that or not. But again, that would be something when you all go to the legislature and you're talking to legislators, to float the idea.
All right, so now we're going to go ahead and move over here. We're going to come over here, and then we'll work our way. Everyone's going to get a chance. Okay, I'll do next.
Steve,
Say your name.
Gina Castañeda. Working with the school choice how long has it been, Alan? Since many, many years. I always saw that at the beginning, and I'm glad that we're doing this now, so we can add pressure to the representatives, because we would always end up waiting for the beginning of the session. And at that point, then, we were having some friction with the Association of Bishops, because they had their own little, bill, and we're over here trying to get this other bill. So I was glad I talked to the Archbishop approximately about a year and a half ago, 2 years, when Governor Abbott came into town, and I pulled him over to the side. That said, okay, what's going on? Look, get on board, because we're closing a lot of parochial schools because people can't afford it. You gotta get on board. And I'm glad that they're doing that now. But at the same time, what are we gonna meet any more resistance from any other schools that you know of? I mean, as far as the religious.
So, well, this warrior over here can back me up on this. There's going to be a lot of resistance to this.
Yeah.
Always.
I mean, you're facing some very strong, well-funded lobbies, unions, etc. There are a lot of people in the state that it's not in their best interest, not the kids, in their best interest. So I've noticed that there were, have you ever heard the term grass tops? Then all of a sudden so for those who don't know, grassroots is like true activist people on the ground working. Grass tops are when an operative or a company create basically fake groups. They just come up with their own name, sign some people up,
Like pastors.
and they have, you know what I'm talking about. So already I saw last time some groups that were popping up, and pastors groups we've never heard of that were against school choice. So I think it was manufactured, and yeah, I know. No, someone has a fake group out there. So I don't want to sugarcoat this. Maybe I sounded too optimistic. It's going to be a battle to get this done. The good news is we should have more reps, and there will probably be more than a majority that say they'll vote for it. Whether it's in exactly all the form that people want and have all the things that want, that's where you have to individually have to go lobby your legislators. Because there may be legislators that were for some of the things that we want, but then they'll hear from the other side and put pressure. So it's gonna be a battle. There's not 100% guarantee this will pass. What I can tell you is that we're, I think, in the best position in my lifetime to ever get it passed. And I know the governor is very committed to get this to the finish line. And if I could share what I heard the governor say to a TPF dinner, and somebody was saying, gosh, it looks like we're gonna fail this session. This is before last session.
Oh, yeah.
You know, he said, this, you know what I'm saying? He basically, I'm paraphrasing, but he's basically saying, hey, I'm looking at a football field that doesn't have a clock on it. That I'm looking at it from getting it from one end of the goal to the other. And I'm not looking at this as a 1 quarter or 2 quarter game. I'm not looking at it a 1 or 2 or 3 session. I hope to get it done this session. That was when we had the special. If I don't, I'm coming back next session and hope to get it. If I don't, I'm coming back the session after that. So it's going to be a battle, but the governor is committed as long as he's in office to continuing it. And you know, I always hate to speak for him, but I think it's safe to say that he would like the history books to read that he was the governor when education was changed fundamentally in the state, and he's committed to do it. So that means, in my mind, we have the best chance that we're ever going to get. I would never bet against that guy, ever. Now, I'm very biased. I've known him for over 30 years. I've practiced law in front of him when he was a district court judge. He's the hardest working, I was going to say politician, but he's about, I don't know anybody that I've ever seen works as hard. I mean, he's just, this is what he does. He works on being the governor every day. And he is super determined. And without my having to say very much, you can just kind of imagine from his life story, you know, the obstacles that he comes. You know, I think I can say this because it was in the newspaper. There was an article in the Houston Chronicle about the governor shedding a tear. Did anybody see that?
Yes.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about? It was a reporter that just went up to him and said, when he spoke at the recent convention in Milwaukee, he said, you know, it was just 3 days after the 40th anniversary of him being paralyzed. And the reporter asked him, did you ever imagine, you know, 40 years ago, you know, when you're lying in the hospital bed, because they had pictures of it that he sent out, that 40 years later you'd be on stage like this? And the governor said no. He said the governor got all teary-eyed. And I think we forget sometimes that you have to have, yeah, I like it too. You have to have a steely determination to be where he is. And I also point out, he has never lost an election. And that's another way of saying he's very competitive. He does not like to lose. He has gone all in on this. Did any of y'all ever see the movie The Aviator about Howard Hughes?
Oh, yeah.
Got Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah.
He actually gives the real speech that Howard Hughes gave in front of that committee where he says, and I'm paraphrasing, I've got my whole reputation wrapped up in this. Remember that speech? And he said, I'm basically, he's all in, and if that spruce goose doesn't fly, I'm going to get up and move out of the country. Does that ring a bell? I think to myself several times when the governor got involved in it, it was a real speech. You can go on and hear the real Howard Hughes say it. He told the senators, you know, that he's basically saying, I've got my whole being in on this. I'm all in on this. I'm putting all my chips in. You know, I've got everything on the table, and you know, if I don't pull it off, I'll leave the country. I think Governor Abbott has his whole reputation wrapped up in this.
God bless him.
I think he's got his whole being put to this, and he ain't leaving the country.